Okay, moving on to the next section in Chapter 6, we're going to look at some of the reasons potentially why attachment could fail. All right, one is social deprivation. Children that are in deprived situations with limited social stimulation, have difficulty getting attached to people. We talked about Harlow's monkeys, and that's just like the monkeys, Harlow concluded, the Harlows did, that socially withdrawn children can make progress if provided younger playmates. And so if there's other social stimulation, maybe not from the caregiver, but from others in the environment, Harlow's found if their rhesus monkeys were socialized with other younger rhesus monkeys, that they did just fine. The contact comfort helped, but the social stimulation was extremely important. If we look at similar studies with children, we know that children who in the past have received things that they needed, food, clothing, shelter, but lacked emotional support, they had symptoms of being withdrawn and depressed. If there's a couple different studies that were talked about in your book in chapter 6 under studies with children, in this section, they looked at institutionalized children for the most part. And so we know that these kids, when they didn't have that social interaction or that support, that they did show symptoms. The age of the child also contributes to how well the child can overcome social stimulation or social deprivation. If we look a little bit closer here, infants do have a powerful capacity to recover. They've looked. There was a study done with Guatemalan children. Now, Guatemalan children in a certain isolated village, there's a group of Guatemalan natives that believe fresh air and sunshine will sicken children. So until about 13, 14 months, the children are kept in windowless huts. They don't really go outside until they can until they can walk. And they're kept in these windowless huts and played with infrequently. Now, they do show, obviously, some deficits once they reach the age of being able to walk and can go outside and can move into a hut with a window. But by 11 years of age, they are just as alert, just as active, seem to have recovered, and they're very much like children in the United States in that way. There was also a study done back in the early to mid 60s, a longitudinal study, where they looked at infants who had been orphaned, those who were determined intellectually disabled, and they were placed in the care of older institutionalized girls. So these girls would play with them, would nurture them, would interact with them, give that stimulation. And after 4 years, they showed a dramatic gain in IQ as compared to those who did not get those same sorts of interactions and nurturing from the older girls. Now, another reason that that attachment can fail is because of child abuse and neglect. There are some statistics out there that are rather alarming from the Department of Health and Human Services. By the time a child is 2 years of age, 9 in 10 parents have engaged in some sort of psychological or emotional abuse. More than half have slapped or spanked their children. 1/3 have pushed, grabbed, or shoved their children. Nearly 2/5, or 41% of American children, are neglected or abused each year by their parents. 1 in 10 can be exposed to serious injury, and thousands die. Many are sexually abused. But researchers think that about 50 or 60% of child abuse and neglect go unreported. So those numbers may be even higher. Now, there are 6 types of physical abuse recognized by the Department of Health and Human Services. That's physical abuse, which causes pain and physical injury; sexual abuse, and including sexual molestation, exploitation, and intercourse; emotional abuse, And these are actions that impair the child's emotional, social, or intellectual functioning. Physical neglect, so failure to care for, provide adequate food, housing, shelter, clothing, medical care. Emotional neglect, failure to provide adequate nurturing, guidance, emotional support, and educational neglect. For example, permitting or forcing a child to be truant. All right, so what are some of the effects of child abuse? Well, there are many, and here are just a few that are fairly clear. They show a higher incidence of personal and social problems as well as psychological disorders. Obviously, they're going to be less securely attached. That's kind of why we're talking about that, this in this category. They have less intimate peer and social relationships, more aggressive, less compliant, lower self-esteem, lower educational performance, a greater risk of delinquency, promiscuous behavior, substance abuse, and abused children are more likely to act aggressively towards their partners. Now, what are some of the causes of child abuse? Stress. Stress in the family, stress in the parent. A history of child abuse in at least one of the parents' backgrounds. So if one of the parents was abused as a child, that's going to be more likely. It's going to be more likely that abuse happens in their home as well. Unrealistic expectations of children, a lack of understanding of what they are and are not capable of. Parents who are substance abusers. Infants and their temperament. Infants who are in pain. Infants who are more difficult are more likely to be abused. Crying infants can be found to be aversive to abusive parents. A simple act of crying could set some abusive parents off. And disobedient, inappropriate, or unresponsive children are more likely to be abused as well. Okay, things you can do if you suspect child abuse. Obviously, report it to the authorities. We can help abusive parents, by providing training to the general population, helping by targeting at-risk groups such as the poor, single teen moms, and others, to provide parenting programs or home visits for them, present information about abuse and provide support for those families, child abuse hotlines for private citizens who suspect child abuse, and parents who are having difficulty with their own impulses are encouraged to call as well. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in this section is autism spectrum disorders. Now, autism spectrum disorders, or ASDs, can make it difficult for parents and child to attach. And here's why. Autism disorders and disorders on that spectrum involve an impairment in communication and in social skills. So that lack of social skills, that lack of social give and take, can make it difficult for parents and others to become attached to these kids. Now, it also is indicated by repetitive stereotype behavior. There are different kinds of, or different forms of ASD. We have Asperger's. Here we see kids with social deficits, some of that stereotype behavior, not significant or cognitive language delays. So often very academically gifted, very academically bright, but do have some of that stereotypical autistic behavior and do have those lack of social skills. We have Rett's disorder. Now, this is where physical behavior, motor, and cognitive development begins normally, but then seems to take a turn to the more abnormal level as after a few months of development. And then we have childhood disintegrative disorder. Childhood disintegrative disorder is where abnormal functioning begins to happen and a loss of previously acquired skills begin to happen. So those skills tend to lessen over time. All right, some other characteristics of ASD, some key indicators. When they're young, don't babble, don't point, don't make meaningful gestures, doesn't speak, child does not speak by the age of 16 months, doesn't use combined words by 2 years, doesn't respond to their name being called, loses language or social skills, poor eye contact, doesn't seem to know how to play with toys, excessively lines up toys or other objects, seems to be attached to one particular toy or object doesn't smile, and at times seems to be hearing impaired. Now, just some facts about autism that you should know. Autism is 4 to 5 times more likely or more prevalent in boys. Attachment for these kids is often weak or non-existent. Again, because a lot of times they're missing those social cues. There's a lack of understanding on how that socialization works, and there's even, quite frankly, a lack of communication. They simply show a ritualistic behavior, have a hard time with change. Many times they show mutism, a refusal to speak, echolalia, just repeating, automatic repetition of sounds or words, and pronoun reversal, referring to themselves as you or he. Now, some people believe that autism develops because of parental rejection, and this is simply not true. There has been no research to show that autism is a result of bad parenting or parental rejection. Now, some of the things that have been linked to autism, not causal necessarily, but do seem to be related, factors like low birth weight and moms who are older. These things seem to be related to autism and may contribute to autism. All right. Well, there is no quote unquote cure for autism. It's not a disease. Um, it's just the way the kids are wired. So autism is often treated with some things we know from things we've studied in learning, like behavioral modification programs, really looking at instruction for parents and for kids on an individualized one-on-one basis. Some medications may help, but it's more about working with the child, understanding what the child can do, how the child learns, what's going to be best for that child, a very individualized learning cognitive approach. Each child is different. Each child is going to respond in a different way. Each child is going to have things that they like, that they dislike, that they're good at, that they're not so good at. And so we really need to take a much more individualized approach in treating those who are autistic.